Capitol Hill, Senators Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, both keeping their top positions in closed-door party elections. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Julie Van Derrison for Dana Perino today, and this is the Daily Briefing. The most intense battles are playing out in the lower chamber. Republican Kevin McCarthy defeats Jim Jordan to become minority leader just moments ago as Nancy Pelosi makes her bid for another term as Speaker of the House. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill. And Mike, where do we stand with House leadership races?
Well, Julie, the headline of the hour is that House Republicans have elected Kevin McCarthy to be their new leader. It was a showdown between Kevin McCarthy and conservative Jim Jordan of Ohio. The vote was 159 to 43, and a New York Republican told us why he was a yes on McCarthy.
Certainly Kevin McCarthy has done a fabulous job as majority leader. Disappointing that we're having an election for minority leader. But, he's guided our conference well the last few years, and I think is deserving of standing up there on a weekly basis and fighting the good fight against what appears could be Nancy Pelosi.
On the Democrat side, Nancy Pelosi is trying to round up support from senior Democrats and outside interest groups, hoping to be Speaker again. But some of her colleagues suggest it is time for a change in leadership.
Good question. I think we'll resolve that in the coming weeks.
Are you supporting Leader Pelosi for Speaker at this point?
We'll see you later.
It is clear Leader Pelosi has some work to do. I should note also in that House Republican conference, Steve Scalise was unanimously reelected to be the Republican whip going forward. Julie?
And so on the Senate side, are we expecting the same faces to be in charge again?
Julie, a lot of the same faces. You've got Mitch McConnell continuing on as majority leader, pledging to get things done.
We had divided government more often than not since World War II. So I'll be talking to Speaker Pelosi and House Democrats about what we can do together.
And Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, freshly reelected, says his side will keep Republicans in check.
The Trump administration is the most ethically challenged in history. From the president to his cabinet, and congressional Republicans have backed up that swamp all the way. We're going to fight for real reforms to loosen the grip of special interests in Washington and to let everybody vote.
The one lingering question on the Senate side is whether a Republican or a Democrat will hold that contested Senate seat representing Florida. Julie?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. So as the Senate lays out its to-do list, a Monmouth poll asking Americans, should keeping President Trump in check be a priority of the new Congress? A slim majority of 52% say it is a major priority. More than twice as many who say it's either a small concern or doesn't matter at all. Chris Starwell is a Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. Thank you very much, Chris. Always good to see you. I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to get your take on this vote. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, he ran a hard fight against hardline conservative Jim Jordan for the top GOP leadership slot, and he won. What's your take of the vote?
The Freedom Caucus demonstrated that their great strength is sticking together. They knew that they weren't going to win. It was clear, but they stuck together anyway. So this is a symbolic showing that says that, they're going to be obviously much less powerful in the minority because their ability is to block votes. What they were able to do to exercise their strength during the Republican majority was that they could use their block to kill legislation that more moderate Republicans wanted. In this case, though, they are obviously saying they're going to stick together in the minority, even if it has less consequence.
Speaking of what they wanted, I'll tell you what Jordan won. He wanted this position. I mean, he told House Republicans last night that he was in the best position for this. One of the reasons he gave was that his ability to defend Trump against Democrats and their investigations was better than the rest. What happened with regard to Jim Jordan? Why didn't he get it?
Look, Kevin McCarthy's paid his dues. He's been there. He tried this once. He came up short for Speaker once before. He's raised a lot of money. He's worked really hard. The other thing is this. The Republicans haven't figured out yet that it takes time to figure out that you're in the minority. Kevin McCarthy would have been the logical choice for Speaker because the Speaker is about building coalitions and putting things together. Being minority leader, maybe Jim Jordan has the right skill set for that because that's not about building stuff. That's about blowing stuff up. It's about being a bomb thrower, and that's what Jordan Jordan is really good at.
Yeah.
And maybe he would have been suited to the work, but the Republicans are still thinking about governing and about leadership. They're not thinking about just being demolition artists.
All right. I want to get back to the last, couple months that they've got to get something done, because the clock is ticking as you talk about bombs. As part of the remaining 7 fiscal 2019 spending bills, last month, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that he plans to seek $5 billion for a border wall. Shelby has appropriated $1.6 billion in wall funding, says that the figure could go higher. The House Appropriations Committee provided $5 billion. Whatever happened to Mexico paying for the wall?
That was never going to happen.
I know, but still, it was wishful thinking nonetheless.
Well, also, when politicians are running for office, they say a lot of stuff, much like those Democrats who said they were going to vote against. A lot of those Democrats who said they were going to vote against Nancy Pelosi are going to say, well, it's complicated, I'm not really going to do that. So, politicians don't tell the truth. Newsflash.
Yeah, well, Jim Jordan and others saying that they're going to attach the border wall funding to the spending bill, and then they'll send it to the Senate. I want you to listen to this and react.
What was the single biggest promise we made the American people in 2016 that we have not got done yet? Building the border security wall and securing the border. We haven't had the same commitment, the same intensity. We need to match that and get it done on December 7th.
Okay, but as of yet, no one has decided exactly how much money they're going to push for in this year-end spending deal. But once they do get their ducks in a row, pardon the pun, in this lame duck session, will the Senate pass it? That's the question.
Well, it just depends on when the president wants to declare victory. He can say $5 billion is enough, or is it $11 billion? What's the magic number? Because we've come to terms with the fact that the border wall itself is fungibly defined. We know it doesn't go from coast to coast. We know it doesn't all have to be wall. Some of it can be fence-ish. Some of it can be reinforcing existing fence. So it's a question of how much money does the president want to say is enough money that he feels will insulate him from attacks from his base. As soon as you get to that, what's going on here is pretty simple. Ryan and McConnell have set the table so that there's not going to be fiscal fights in the next year. It will dramatically disempower Democrats if they can push all this spending through.
Right.
But if Jordan can convince the president to dig in his heels and fight and say, no, $5 billion is not enough, then they will empower the Democrats for a lot of tough fiscal cliffs next year.
Here's the hurdle. The Democrats. I mean, how do Republicans get this done in the next 60 days with opposition from Democrats? Here's Chuck Schumer, for example, already talking about a possible shutdown, and guess who he's blaming? Watch.
The Republicans are in charge, and if the government shuts down, it's on their back. Now, we want a couple of things. We want to make sure that the acting attorney general does not interfere with the Mueller investigation, and we believe our Republican colleagues will join us. And we believe if President Trump stays out of the appropriations process, we can have a good bipartisan agreement and the government can move smoothly forward.
The president stays out of the appropriation process. Wishful thinking. Do they move forward? Will they come somewhere to an agreement in the middle?
He has stayed out of it pretty substantially in the past. Look, any fight like this in Washington comes down to one question. Which side does better under the status quo, and who can take the most pain? And in this case, it's the Democrats, because they know that as of January 3rd, their hand will be strengthened dramatically as they take over the House. And when you get right down to it, the clock is running on the Republicans in a way that it's not on the Democrats. The Democrats have that leverage in this lame duck period, so that if the Republicans want those votes in the Senate, they're going to have to do something to accommodate.
Right, and I should clarify, when I say that the president most likely won't stay out of the process, I don't mean he will not interfere in the passing of this. However, he's going to opine. I mean, that's what this president does, and the Democrats don't like it, and they want him to stay out of it. And you can't expect the president to stay out of decisions that he's trying to push through before the new year. Anyway, nonetheless, we will have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Chris Darwell. Great to see you. Meanwhile, the president's written answers to Robert Mueller's questions are finally being finalized and could be sent to the special counsel by the end of this week. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live on the North Lawn. All right, so what are our sources telling you?
Well, the answer to both of those questions is yes and yes. This goes back almost a year now. It started November 21st, 2017, Julie, when Robert Mueller first told the president's outside attorneys that he wanted to have a sit-down interview with the president regarding Russia and also regarding possible obstruction of justice. So they have been wrestling over this now for the better part of 12 months, and it's finally down to the point where they do believe that they will be submitting answers to the special counsel Robert Mueller by the end of this week. Now, Robert Mueller initially in March of this year gave them a list of 49 questions that he wanted answered. A lot of those were talking about Russia, possible collusion with the Trump campaign, but a lot went to obstruction of justice as well. And he wanted to have a sit-down interview. After weeks and months of negotiations, really, the president's attorneys came down to this idea of, well, we'll answer questions about Russia, and you may or may not get a sit-down interview. And then that was paired back to, we'll answer questions about Russia in a written form. So for the last few weeks, they have been working out answers. First of all, it was to find out exactly what information they had. Then it was to put them in some sort of shape where they could present them to Robert Mueller. And it's likely that by the end of this week, they will submit those questions to Mueller. The president, I'm told, doesn't have a problem with it. The president's attorneys don't have a problem. And so it likely, Julie, will happen.
All right. And I understand you've got some news about Mueller's new boss.
Yeah, Matt Whitaker, the news is that the Department of Justice has issued a 20-page opinion on why they believe that the president was within his legal bounds to appoint somebody who was not Senate confirmed to that position. They cite the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. There were two tracks that the president could have taken. He could have gone through the confirmed line of succession at the Department of Justice to appoint a replacement for Jeff Sessions, even in the interim, or he could have used the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. The Department of Justice also states that while appointing a, quote, principal officer to a position does require Senate confirmation, appointing someone to that position in the interim does not. And the Department of Justice went all the way back to 1866 to cite an example. Back in 1866, the Assistant Attorney General J. Hubley Ashton served for 6 days after the resignation of Attorney General James Speed. Hubley Ashton was not confirmed. But to go back to 1866, I mean, that's doing a lot of political history, Julie.
Yeah. All right. I'm John Roberts at the White House. Thank you.
Thank you.
So some Democrats are trying to prevent Nancy Pelosi.
Have 53 Republican senators to set the agenda next year.
Optimistic Republicans are back at work as leadership elections are underway in Congress. We will hear from the new House Minority Leader soon, and we will bring that to you live as soon as it happens. And we had the highest midterm turnout in 104 years. What can we learn from those numbers? We're going to tell you next.
When our country used to flex its muscle with battleships like the USS Iowa.
We dive into the continued chaos.
Kevin McCarthy as Minority Leader moments ago following a months-long showdown with his chief challenger, Jim Jordan. President Trump has been asking McCarthy to make some kind of deal with Jordan, one of the co-founders of the Freedom Caucus. Meanwhile, Jordan is blaming his party's loss of the House on Republican leadership. Listen.
We failed to keep the majority. I think you got to step back and ask, why did we lose? What are we up against now, and how do we win it back? And I think probably the most important of those three questions is, why did we lose in the first place? I mean, 2 years ago, the American people elected President Trump to come to this town and shake it up, and he has done just that. But I don't think they've seen the same intensity from House Republicans.
Okay, so Amos Snead was an aide to former House Majority Whip Roy Blunt, now a partner at S3 Public Affairs and the co-author of Climbing the Hill. Mo Alithi is a former communications director for the DNC and Fox News contributor. Thank you for both of you coming on today. Those are some strong words coming from Jim Jordan. I mean, nothing we haven't seen. He's a very strong-willed and outspoken member of the White House or of Washington. But what would you make, first of all, of House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Mo, who ran, against this hardline conservative Jim Jordan for the top GOP leadership slot? Jordan is essentially saying that the leadership is to blame for losing the House. I mean, is there a blame game going on here?
Jim Jordan is, you probably would be hard-pressed to find a greater Trump ally in the House of Representatives, at least one that's still there, that wasn't defeated in the most recent midterms. And that is sort of the White House line, is that this is Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy's and House leadership's fault that we lost all these seats. It's a hard case to make because, you know, the races that Democrats won that gave them control of the House were mainly suburban districts. Those suburban districts rebelled in epic fashion against this president and held his party accountable for his actions. So to make the argument that this was all House leadership's fault because they weren't Trumpy enough, I think could not be a bigger miscalculation of what the results actually said.
Okay, I want your take, first of all, Amos, on the decision for Jim Jordan not to get this position. I mean, he is a staunch ally of the president. He certainly makes his opinions known. He is the type of person that the president would want to have his back. He was very much involved in the Benghazi investigation and believed and sourced that as being a reason why he would be great at defending the president when it came to the current numerous investigations that are being conducted, but not by not just Mueller, but now the Democrats that are going to be taking office in January. Do you think a mistake was made here, or do you think the pick was a right one?
I think if you look at this vote and you look at the final vote tally and how many votes Kevin McCarthy won by, I think it really just tells us all that Kevin McCarthy won this because he has earned the respect and trust of his colleagues in the House. And let's remember, Kevin McCarthy has been in the minority before. And so now your leadership team is Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise. And Scalise has such a national profile. I think that's a very strong team, the McCarthy-Scalise team, a very strong team to take Republicans back to the majority in 2020 in the House of Representatives.
Okay, Politico reports that President Trump has urged McCarthy to make some kind of deal with Jordan, which includes installing Jordan as the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, which is a position which, in fact, Doug Collins is considered the leading candidate for. Mo, will Republican leadership take the president's advice here, considering those who didn't, you know, lost elections weeks ago?
Yeah, well, Amos can correct me as someone that's worked in Republican leadership. My understanding of the Republican caucus is it's actually not leadership's call. It's a vote of the members of that committee will decide who their ranking member is. And my sense is that Jim Jordan just isn't all that well liked by a lot of his colleagues. I mean, look at how badly he just got beaten this election. Now, might they give it to him as a concession to the White House? Who knows? But look, Jim Jordan himself is facing a lot of scrutiny and for some of the actions back home. Whether or not that is the right profile for the ranking member on judiciary is something Republicans are going to have to reckon with. But there's no question, regardless of whether or not he gets that slot, this guy is going to continue to be a thorn in the side of establishment Republicans. He's going to continue to be one of the president's top defenders, regardless of what position he holds.
All right, Amos Snead, Mo Alithi, that's all the time we have. Got to end it there. But thank you both.
In the fencing, you got a lot more inspectors and asylum officers down there from CIS ready to start these interviews if they come to a port of entry. They're going to be metered in, and we'll work at the government's pace, not their pace.
All right, so here's where the Trump administration stands on this, and this is what they've gone through so far, their latest actions on the caravan. He's ordered the deployment of up to 9,000 troops to the border. U.S. authorities have closed down several lanes of traffic at 2 border crossings from Tijuana to California. The president also signed a proclamation temporarily barring migrants who enter illegally from claiming asylum. So they can't claim asylum. That is not an option during this point. They're almost doing more harm to those who want to enter this country based on asylum as they are trying to flee dangerous situations, because now people that want to do that and go down the right road cannot.
Well, what he's saying is if you come through the port of entry and you claim asylum, then you're entering the United States legally,
right,
and then you'll be processed in accordance with your desire for political asylum. And then, of course, you're going to be questioned about that, and you'll have to demonstrate that there really is a compelling need for you to have asylum. That has taken weeks in the past. They're going to accelerate that process. But if you're going to jump the fence, as we had up there earlier, they're not going to tolerate that claim of asylum because you're entering the country illegally, and they'll be told to go back and enter the country through a port of entry, and you'll be processed for your asylum claim. That's what in theory is supposed to happen.
All right. General Jack Keane, thank you very much. They're still about 1,100 miles away, so they have quite a distance to travel. But nonetheless, the administration is prepared. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Great
good talking to you, Joe.
Good to see you as always. More election drama unfolding in the Sunshine State. Fox News now confirming the Florida State Department is asking federal attorneys to investigate possible election fraud. All this as 2 races remain undecided and a deadline hangs in the balance. And Griff Jenkins has been watching it for us. He joins us live in Lauderhill, Florida with the latest there. Hey, Griff.
Hey, Julie, just when you thought it couldn't get more interesting in Florida, new allegations of election law violations. Fox News now in receipt of a letter from the Secretary of State to 3 U.S. attorneys of Florida. In part, it says, quote, supervisors in at least 4 counties have received altered forms wrongly directing the voter to return the form by 5 p.m. on Thursday, November 8th, well after the date to cure a vote by mail ballot. The problem is, under Florida law, a vote by mail ballot is due by 5 p.m. on Monday, November 5th, the day before the election. In these 4 counties, we should highlight them. They are Santa Rosa and Citrus, Okaloosa, and Broward. Now, 3 of the 4 are heavily red districts. Broward, of course, is a heavily blue Democrat one. It is going to be interesting whether or not any of the attorneys now want to find out about whether any of their voters may have been affected. But clearly, yet more election problems. Now, the election supervisor here, Dr. Brenda Snipes, we're hoping to speak with her. Some of the materials also provided to Fox News show that Brenda Snipes was aware of the situation and forwarded on the allegations to the Department of State. The question is whether or not any of the votes being counted behind me, as you are looking in the window now, these are vote by mail ballots being counted. We do not know from the officials here whether or not any of the ones with the wrong directions are mixed in this, or whether they came in late and were held out. That is a big question here, but the recount continues. Also, they do believe, by the way, the recount will be finished here in Broward. Up in Palm Beach, not going so well. They don't think they're going to make that deadline, even though they received an extension, Julie.
All right. Griff Jenkins, thank you very much. Breaking down America's turnout at the polls, my next guest explains the Democratic divides. And Chick-fil-A fans, you're going to want to stay with us. You're not going to want to miss the company's latest rollout.
Program. For Shep, the Justice Department backing President Trump's pick for acting attorney general. But our own Judge Napolitano says Matthew Whitaker has no business in that role. The judge will explain why coming up on Shepard Smith reporting.
Vice President Mike Pence in Burma today, meeting with the country's leader there. Pence seeking an update from President Suu Kyi about the Rohingya crisis in the country. About 700,000 Rohingya Muslims fled to Bangladesh among persecution. Pence also making the case for a free press following the jailing of 2 Reuters journalists last year. So you heard about the long lines. You saw the video on your TV screens as you were watching the election at the polling places all across the country last week, as turnout was actually among the highest in more than a century. This is history-making news, folks. 49.2% of eligible voters made their voices heard. That is the most in a midterm since 1914. Just to put it into perspective, I'm joined now by Bruce Mehlman, former Secretary of Commerce for Technology Policy. Okay, first of all, just talk to us about how meaningful these numbers really mean. The midterm election is not a presidential election, and that's why we're talking about this, because these numbers are that much more significant.
No, you're absolutely right. It was about a third of the eligible voters in the last midterm in 2014. So to get to nearly 50% is really exciting. Until you hear that in your head and you think nearly 50% of people who could vote in this country do vote. So it's tempered. It's great that there's so much more interest and so much more enthusiasm. At the same time, America has a pretty long way to go if we want to equal other countries and other democracies around the world in our participation.
Right. One thing historically has always remained consistent is that one thing that drives people to the polls is either anger or change. They want change. The Democrats say that the reason why the House was taken over by the Democrats is because they like to point out that the reason for the change was the president who's sitting in the White House. But that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of societal forces that are at play here, not just the president.
You're absolutely right, Julie. There's a short-term and a longer-term reason for this kind of turnout. Short-term reason is absolutely the president. When voters were asked, were you trying to send a signal of support or opposition to the president in your midterm vote? What you found is more Americans, 2/3 of the voters, were trying to send a signal, most ever. Interestingly, for the Democrats, I would point out that more Americans were trying to send a signal of support for this president in this midterm than were trying to send a signal of support for George W. Bush after 9/11 in 2002. But it's the longer forces. It's in which Donald Trump is much more of a symptom than a cause.
Right.
It's growing income inequality. It's concern about the future. It's accelerating technology. It's fear of inadequate competition in the marketplace. It's just like if you go back to 1914, the Gilded Age, and that's why you're seeing so much enthusiasm.
You know, the same could be said for the fact that the Republicans actually picked up seats in the Senate. And those senators who ran on Donald Trump's policies, those are the ones that won. And those seats that flipped to Democratic, those were the senators that did not run on President Trump's policies. So that could be argued as well. I want to talk about the demographic shift here, okay? 2018, it highlighted basically a growing demographic, two Americas, basically. One voted geographically, that was one side, and then education drove another reason for people voting. Why don't you explain this whole breakup?
No, you're very much right. When you take a look across our demographics as a society, there are a variety of gaps. And we all know about the gender gap, or the gap between, say, millennials and senior citizens.
Right.
They've been pronounced. Two of the fastest growing are the education gap, those with a college degree and those without a college degree. That's growing fast. But the fastest of all are those who live in rural areas and urban areas. And it played out in the elections. The elections in the Senate were fundamentally fought in Trump country, in places where the president had an overall net approval, and voters, by making it a referendum on himself, the president had voters supporting him or opposing him, and that's why the Republicans gained seats in the Senate. First time it was different than the House in 1970, but the converse is also true. Where you have higher levels of education in the suburbs was a killing fields for the Republican House, and you saw, therefore, the most losses by the Republicans since Watergate in the House.
Interesting. Yeah, certainly good stuff. And we got another election in a couple years. So fasten your seatbelts. Are you ready for that? All right, Bruce Mehlman, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Good to see you. A major shakeup in the e-cigarette industry as the FDA cracks down on products targeting teenagers. And the story behind this year's White House Christmas tree next. Know about. It's our Daily 3. First, hate crimes in the U.S. increased 17% in 2017. The FBI saying the majority of offenses were motivated by hatred over race, ethnicity, or ancestry. It is the third straight year hate crimes have risen. Second, the accused Parkland shooter faces new charges. The public defender's office says he hit a jail guard and tried to take the guard's taser. Nicholas Cruz is already facing 17 counts of murder. And finally, this year's White House Christmas tree almost didn't make the cut. The North Carolina grower says he abandoned it a few years back, but the White House liked the natural look, so they went with it. Well, flavored e-cigs, the e-cigarettes, they have been yanked from stores. The nation's top maker, Juul, is apparently behind the move. It's all part of a proactive push to keep products away from teens. Christina Partsinevelos joins us now here in New York to explain. So why the pull?
Why the pull? You have the FDA that's really trying to crack down on these e-cigarette companies that are marketing their product to minors. The companies are saying, hey, no, we're seeing an alternative to smoking. And so these Juul products, this is one, it's literally the size of a USB key, have grown in popularity amongst the younger generation. Why? Because they come in various flavors like coconut and cream. And so now Juul, the maker of this, has decided that they're going to pull those flavors from about 90,000 stores across the United States, but only temporarily until they put in place stronger placement. So scanning your ID to make sure you're 21 years old and stopping any bans. The problem is the CDC is saying that this is growing so much in popularity for use. According to their research, about an increase of 77% of sales have gone to high school students. And then when you're talking about middle school students, we're seeing a 50% increase. So according to the research, 3.5 million minors are vaping and using these various e-cigarette products, which is why Juul has said that they're going to be pulling them from some stores, as well as closing their Instagram and Facebook accounts.
Oh, God, I dread my children growing up. Chick-fil-A, I understand, has some big news, too. Tell us about that.
I know, we're going from e-cigarettes to Chick-fil-A. Well known for their chicken and waffles, they are pairing up with DoorDash to deliver food to your door. DoorDash offers a lot of food options. They deliver within the area, and so Chick-fil-A is pairing up. You can actually get, through this deal for the next week until next Tuesday, 200,000 chickens. They're going to be giving away 200,000 chicken sandwiches over the next week or so, but you have to order through DoorDash. You have to live within 10 minutes of a Chick-fil-A location, and obviously there's a catch. You gotta spend a minimum of $5, but you get a free chicken sandwich.
Oh, well, there you go. Delivery. Now there's no excuse to avoid that delicious food. All right. Thank you very much. A dog in St. Louis who sacrificed nearly everything for her pups gets rewarded in the best way possible. Star was sick and desperately in need of a kidney transplant, so her owners tracked her down. Elsa, one of Star's puppies, she was actually able to donate her kidney to save her mom's life.
I could tell, this was a mom that this was her baby, and she was going to do what she needed to do to try to save her baby.
Wow, that's awesome. And the good news is the operation was a success for both dogs, and they are expected to live normal lives. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Julie Banderas. Here's Trace Gallagher in for Shep Today.